see that God is faithful to us even when we're hurting. And there are times when we are struggling, when we have such despair in our hearts, we may doubt that God is even alive, that He's present in our lives. Yet as we continue on in our lives, if we notice, if we pay close attention, God is still present. God still cares. Last week we looked at the providence of God, that yes, even while there might be times where it seems like God is not present, God is still working in the background. He's working behind the scenes to bring about great joy to our lives. As we ended last week, we saw that at the beginning of chapter 2, Ruth sees that she needs to go to work. She needs to take care of herself and her mother-in-law. And Naomi is rather indifferent about it, but she sends Ruth out, and Ruth comes across this man named Boaz. And they have such an exchange, and Boaz shows her such quality of character as she has shown him. So Boaz sends her with so many more portions than she could have earned in one day. And so she goes to Naomi and she tells Naomi what's transpired. And Naomi says, well, who has done this? That they've shown you such great blessing by giving you all of this grain, all of this attention, all of this concern. And Ruth tells her who it is. And a light bulb goes off in Naomi's head. And she realizes that this is God's word. And as she continues talking to Ruth, she makes this declaration saying that God had not forsaken the living and the dead. So what we're going to see tonight is a little bit different. What we're going to see tonight is the attitude and character of Naomi has drastically changed from the end of chapter 1. Now we're going to see a Naomi with a certain kind of energy. We see Naomi with a certain kind of hope. That's what we're talking about tonight. Tonight's lesson, Tonight's lesson is about hope. And I know we've covered a lot concerning hope. This past year we had a class on hope. We've had several lessons on hope. And it's important for us to remind ourselves of the great hope we have in Jesus Christ. Remember the word hope, the definition of hope. It's not wishful thinking as we often use it, but it is confident expectation. It is a great anticipation over what you know will come to pass. Now again, think about where Naomi was at the end of chapter 1. She describes herself as being Mara, for she is very bitter. She is disillusioned to God's love and His compassion. She knows that He is sovereign, that He is almighty, but she sees that as a detriment to her because she believes He is out to get her. He is trying to punish her. So she changes herself from pleasant, that's the word Naomi, that's what the name Naomi means, is pleasant. She changes it to bitterness. That is how she felt. Even when her daughter-in-law showed such devotion to her, all Naomi could do was think about herself. But again, we see a different Naomi tonight. We see her go on the offense. We see who initiates a plan. We see one who formulates an encounter in order to bring Ruth happiness and joy. And she even offers at the end of chapter 3 encouragement. And you have to say, why? Why has this come to pass? Because she has found a great hope in the God of Israel. Because she knows that He has not forsaken her the way that she thought He originally had. Here's the thing about hope that we're going to see tonight. Hope changes the perspective of the most downtrodden, turning the night into day and from the morning into dancing. It is the confidence, this hope is the confidence in God, which lights a flame within the heart of a Christian to serve his God, to serve her God with such a great energy and an unwavering allegiance. As we see Naomi change tonight, we will also see every Christian who has hope in God not only changes for the better, but they endure the great race that is before. Well, let's look together tonight as we read. Let's examine the hope Naomi had and the hope that we can have together tonight. Let's begin verse 1 of Ruth chapter 3. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative with whose young woman you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. Do not make yourself known to the man until he's finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Notice her reply. And she replied, all that you say, I will do. So as we continue on in our series this week, as we continue on tonight with what we've been seeing, I want us to notice, first of all, the plan. I want us to see the plan that Naomi has for Ruth. See, Naomi, she is so different in chapter 3. Did you notice how she talked, how she described what Ruth ought to do? That she wasn't just sitting back anymore, just allowing the world to continue without her. But she has formulated this plan, not just in the broad strokes, but she has great detail for how Ruth can find happiness. See, Naomi has ceased her inward despair, and she has shifted to outward care. She has ceased looking inward, and she began to look outward. She ceased caring simply for herself, only for herself, and now she shows care for Ruth's well-being. She wants Ruth to be happy. Her focus has shifted. And again, it's because of that great confidence she has in God. Now, see, here we are. There's this point where the barley season is coming to an end. It's going to be over soon. And so Naomi sees that this blessing that they have where they're getting a week's worth of food and one day's work, that's eventually going to come to an end. She knows that the barley harvest is temporary, and she wants to find Ruth true, permanent happiness. And again, I think about how she showed initiative. See, in chapter 2, Ruth is the one that has to say, Naomi, how about I go out to the field? How about I go out to the field and I will work? And of course, Naomi responded with, go, my daughter. Now in chapter 3, what we're seeing is Naomi initiates the plan for Ruth and for her life. Naomi says, Ruth, don't I want you to be happy? She says in verse 1, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Naomi understands that Ruth needs something more permanent, and as a mother-in-law should, she decides to help find happiness for the one who has shown such great care toward her. Now there's the situation which is rather unique in chapter 3, and here it is. Ruth has this kinsman redeemer. You read about this in chapter 2, and you read about this in chapter 3. When we read that Boaz is some sort of distant relative, well, what in the world is a kinsman redeemer? Well, this is the way that it happened, the way that it was set up. In Deuteronomy 25, 5 and 6, we read that if a husband who is married to his wife dies without them having children, then the closest relative to the husband, who is not married, has an obligation to marry the wife. And then they come together and they have a child. That first child actually has the name, the title, and the inheritance of the brother who has been deceased, the one who has died. So that is what's occurring here. Is Naomi recognizes that Boaz is a relative of hers, that he's a relative of her husband's. And so he has the opportunity, in fact, he has the obligation of marrying Ruth. And if he were to do so, then not only would he and Ruth be very happy for the rest of their days, but there would actually be a descendant of Elimelech. Remember, that was the concern all this time with Naomi, was that no one was going to continue on in the line, that her family wouldn't find honor. And then, of course, Ruth and her would be lonely, that they would be without, that they'd be suffering. And Naomi recognizes this is part of God's plan. So in verse 3, Naomi says, wash therefore and anoint yourself. And some think, what does this mean? Is she telling Ruth to put on some kind of Sunday morning dress, something that's a little bit more nice or a little bit more formal than what she's wearing right now, that she's supposed to put perfume on herself?
Not exactly. Most people believe, most scholars believe, when Naomi said, Ruth, anoint yourself and wash yourself, that there was this disposition a widow took. When there was one who lost her husband, she would wear certain clothes, and she would act in a certain way to let everyone know, I'm in mourning. Now, what Naomi tells Ruth to do is essentially cease in that mourning. Change your disposition. Change how you look. Not that she's beautifying herself to make herself an object to this man, but so that she can signal to him that she's no longer in mourning. See, Naomi has thought about this, and she has understood the reason why Boaz may not be pursuing her is because he doesn't want to cause disrespect to her family. But then things become a little bit more odd, even more, we might say the word weird, in this plan that she's supposed to go to Boaz, not during the day, but late at night. She's not supposed to go to him in a public place, but in the threshing floor, which is somewhat private. And then instead of talking to him directly, she wants him to first fall asleep, and then Ruth to lay at his feet. Now we can either see this as being somewhat promiscuous, or we can see this as, frankly, less respect than Ruth deserves. I mean, you think about it. How many of you, if you wanted to propose to your current spouse, how many of you would have lied at their feet first? If you wanted to tell someone that you liked them, would you go and lie at their feet while they're asleep? That seems kind of odd to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one, but I find that peculiar. Well, there's a reason why she did so. We'll look at that more in just a minute. But think about the plan Naomi has enacted. It is very specific. It is very well thought out. And it has an intended purpose. But it is odd. It is peculiar. She hasn't shown a lot of great sense since Ruth chapter 1. Yet notice verse 5. Ruth replied, all that you say, I will do. Not some of what you say, not most of what you say, all that you say, I will do. And you got to think, if you're Ruth at this point, and Naomi has come to you, and she has told you to do all these things, would you be so quick to do it? See, because what Ruth is doing here is she's showing absolute humility and trust in her mother-in-law. But when has Naomi acted in such a way that she has earned that trust? I'm not really sure. In chapter 1, she completely forgot Ruth when she described herself as being without, as being empty. In Ruth chapter 2, she seems somewhat indifferent by hanging out at the house while Ruth goes to work. She doesn't even have a plan to help Ruth find a good job in a town where she knows everyone. But here in Ruth 3, she suddenly is inspired. Yet Ruth says, all that you say, I will do. I think about the character of Ruth. I love how Ruth is portrayed in this book. Chapter 1, she shows such devotion. Chapter 2, she shows such respect. In chapter 3, she shows such trust through humility. For one has to have great trust in another to be so humble. And that's what we see with Ruth. And that's what we can pick up on regarding our relationship with God. When you think about your relationship with God, can you say, God, all that you say, I'm going to do? See, whereas Naomi has disappointed Ruth in the past, God has never let us down. At times we may feel like He has. At times we may not understand what He's doing. But when we read in Scripture that God has a plan for us, at times it may seem odd. At times we may not fully understand it. But do we still trust in Him? Are we still humble enough, as we talked about this morning, to follow Him, even when things don't always make sense? See, because I can't say to God's plan, yeah, some of these things I'm going to do, but not all of them. God's Word is not a buffet where we're able to pick out the things that we really like and kind of skip over the things we don't like. God calls for us to have the utmost trust in who He is. God calls for our allegiance in Him to be built on that trust and what God has shown us in the past that he is faithful. Well, we continue on in verse 6. And we see not only this plan, but we also see the meeting between Ruth and Boaz, beginning in verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. Now at midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" She answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do this for you, all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know you are a worthy woman. And now it is true, I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then, as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down till morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but arose before anyone could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring out the garment you are wearing and hold it out." So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. So let's talk about some things that might be a little confusing. First, what is a threshing floor? A threshing floor was a large circular structure, most likely made of stone, either in a barn or outside. And whenever you were harvesting, you would bring all of your goods, all of your crop to this threshing floor, where you'd either beat out the stalks or you'd have an oxen or some kind of animal walk on it. And once you had done that, while the crop had been broken up, while the stalk had been broken up with the grain or the barley, what have you, there's still some of the stalk left over. So they would take winnowing fans and they would throw it up in the air, and the chaff would go away with the wind, but the seed, the wheat, again, whatever it is, would fall back to the ground, and there's your crop. So they would spend all day and good portions of the night doing this, getting ready for the end of harvest. Now, another thing that was important was, especially this was the day of the judges, when everyone did what was right in his own eyes. There's a lot of instigation, rebellion, inward fighting among the tribes and in houses. You couldn't trust everybody. I often hear this when I was younger. My parents said, we used to have our homes and I have to lock them, but now it feels like we have to lock our doors wherever we go. There's a lack of trust. So Boaz would stay there and he would guard his grain all night. So here we go. He goes and he eats and he drinks and he lies down and he's happy. He's had a good day. Lo and behold, when he wakes up, there's this woman at his feet. Well, what is that all about? Why in the world would Ruth lie there by his feet? And again, some might see this, and I've even read some books saying that this was something that was outside of what we normally see with an encounter. And it was, again, something that was promiscuous, but rather the way we should read it is the way the Bible, the way God intended for us to read it, is as a sign of humility. She wasn't being promiscuous. She was being humble. See, the way that she approached Boaz was in the way of a servant. Now, again, I want you to think about certain parts of this plan, the audacity of what Ruth is doing, how forward she's being, things that she could have used as excuses to her mother-in-law. Naomi, don't you understand what I'm doing? First of all, I am a woman going to a man demanding him marriage. That doesn't happen in this society. Second, I'm a Moabite going to an Israelite. I'm outward and I'm trying to get within the group, within the tribe. Why would he ever marry a Moabite? Third, I'm a poor day laborer and he's a rich business owner. You imagine what kind of speculation there could be there? She's risking her job and her reputation by doing all these things. All that you say, I will do. So he wakes up and he's shocked, as anyone would be. And this is Ruth's response. Again, think about her respect and her humility here in verse 9. I am your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Some have mantle, others have wings. What we should pick up from this is it's essentially a marriage proposal. She's saying, cover me in your cloak, referring to take me in, marry me. She uses the same words he used in Ruth chapter 2, verse 12. You look in Ruth chapter 2, verse 12, he said, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you've come to take refuge. She then responds by saying, cover me with your wings. She's essentially saying, you know that reward God was talking about? It's you. And I want you to redeem me. And again, this idea of redemption is that he can marry her, set things right in the world. He could do this for her, provide an heir for Naomi's family, as well as bring peace to Ruth in such a heartless time period in Israelite history. Now, this is what's also important for Boaz. You think about Boaz's response. He could have shamed her. He could have mocked her, humiliated her. He could have openly embarrassed her before the public. He could have called her a harlot. But we know his character was one who is worthy. Ruth 2 verse 1 tells us he is a worthy man. When you read in Ruth chapter 2, his kindness can be seen, as well as his love and his affection for this woman. I want you to think about his response to her. He tells her, she's come together and said, she has said to him, I am your servant. And his response is, you could have chosen anyone, yet you chose me. He says, you know, I know your reputation around town. You are a worthy woman. He accepted her proposal. And then he assured her and told her not to fear, that he would do everything he could to redeem her. But again, here's a twist. There's someone who's closer in the line of redemption that could marry her. But what Boaz does is he assures her and says, you know what? By this time tomorrow, everything's going to be resolved. Either this man is going to come and he's going to do right by your family, right by you, and he'll marry you. Or I will. At this point, we've seen a lot of character out of Ruth and out of Boaz, but the story is not over. In verse 14, when they both get up, and they've remained pure, by the way. They both get up before the sun has truly risen, so that you couldn't really distinguish between him and her. What Boaz does here is he has her leave early in order to protect her reputation. Because he knows who she is. He knows that she's an excellent woman. And he doesn't want anything to happen to diminish that reputation. And I think about how a lot of men are considered to be good gentlemen, but how crass they can be, how carnal they can be in describing previous relationships that they've had in what many call locker room talk. Yet you think about Boaz. Boaz is doing everything he can to protect this woman. And then again, he reassures her one more time with what we might call the engagement present. He has her bring her clothes, her outer garment, and he fills it with 6 measures of barley. And we don't know exactly the extent of those measures, but it was probably 2 weeks' supply of food. That was double what she had previously received. And he's letting her know, I remember you. Do not fear. I will not forget you. I'm going to take care of this today. Boaz here, he protects her image, and he protects her from any doubt she might have. And again, I think about this image of us and Christ, that if we come to Christ in a humble way, fully trusting in him, telling him that we are his servant, and we want this relationship between us and God, how God protects us, how he accepts, how he reassures, how he gives us confidence if we come to him in trust and humility. Well, we need to wrap up. Our time is up. As we close the story tonight, let's look at the last 3 verses. And we'll notice confidence all throughout these last 3 verses. So when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, How did you fare, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said, You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. She, being Naomi, replied, Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. I want us to replay this image we've just read about in Ruth chapter 3. See, I imagine Naomi waiting by the door. Maybe she's been waiting there all night, waiting to hear back from her daughter-in-law, and she sees Ruth out in the distance. Again, it's so early in the morning, it's hard to really find any distinguishing features to pinpoint that is her daughter-in-law. But as she comes closer, Naomi notices Ruth is walking a bit slower, that she has something perhaps in her hand. And when Ruth is face to face with Naomi, Naomi sees all this barley. And I can only imagine a twinkle in Naomi's eyes and a smile slowly creasing her face. A smile that she hasn't had in a very long time. And she says, how'd it go? And of course, Ruth, perhaps out of breath, perhaps with excitement, or maybe even a tinge of doubt or concern, anxiety, tells her everything that has occurred. And tells her that Boaz had to prove to her mother-in-law, had to give her something to demonstrate that his commitment to her daughter-in-law was real. But again, there's this pause. Maybe Ruth has demonstrated that there might be some doubt, or maybe some concern, or maybe she's slightly anxious. And I want you to hear the words of her mother. I want you to hear Naomi. She says to Ruth, wait. Wait. Everything will turn out for the better. This man will not rest until all this is settled. Do you hear the confidence? Do you hear the anticipation? And what we read about here is that hope is only secured through patience. Yes, I can say that I have hope in God, that I have confidence in God, but it must be demonstrated through my patience. I must understand that through my patience, I must understand that I have to wait on the Lord, knowing that He is going to handle everything, knowing that He's going to take care of me, knowing He's going to bring about the good at the end. I have to be like Naomi. I have to understand that God is taking care of me. The gradual unfolding of God's plan, of His providence, has been made known to her. And now she's excited. She doesn't have any doubt. She doesn't question any motive from God. Now understand, at this point, Naomi and Ruth are just, there's nothing more they can do. They turn the responsibility over to God. I think we need to do that sometimes as Christians. When I think about my sin, I read that as a Christian, all I need to do is repent of my sins, to confess my sins to God, and He's just and able to forgive me. But there are times where I feel like perhaps my sin is so grievous, perhaps it is so great, that maybe God really won't forgive me. In moments like these, I have to think back to the story of Ruth. And I have to find that confidence that Naomi had in Boaz, I need to have in God. Because now my sin is out of my hands. I have done what God has called for me to do. I need to let Him do what He does best. Demonstrate His love to me through forgiveness. I need to have that same trust in God because He has given me a guarantee. Now this story is not yet over. For again, there's another twist. There's another possible redeemer out there. Will Boaz be able to secure this marriage with Ruth? Will Ruth really live happily ever after? What will happen to Naomi? Again, tune in next week and we'll conclude the story of Ruth. In chapter 4, we will see salvation. We will see a great redeemer, and how as Boaz redeemed Ruth, so Christ redeems us. And we can have great joy in that. As we close tonight, I want us to think about hope. Sometimes it's hard for us to find hope. Perhaps in the presence of an illness, financial struggle, temptation. There's so many heartaches that can prevent us from having confidence in God. They can fill our minds and our hearts with despair. However, when we trust in the living God and we are humble to Him, we can have great confidence in who He is. I want to close with a passage. Lamentations chapter 3, verses 21 through 24. Lamentations is the saddest book in all the Bible. The actual book meaning to lament, to mourn. It's a time, when you think about the book Judges, well, this book is about the judgment. It's when judgment came upon the people of Judah because they refused to obey their God. And Jeremiah is witnessing the destruction of Jerusalem, his own town. He warned them, he cried for them, he prayed for them, but they refused to listen. And so now judgment has fallen upon him. As he weeps, and he describes what he's witnessing. In Lamentations, we have a glimmer of hope. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in Him. Hebrews 12 tells us that we need to run the race with endurance. Lamentations tells us even when the world is falling apart around us, we can have hope in our God who is faithful. Do you want that kind of hope tonight? Do you want the kind of confidence that Naomi had, that Ruth was called to have? Do you want that trust in God that will never fade because God's mercy is renewed day by day? If you need anything at all tonight, if you need to be baptized into Christ, have your sins washed away to meet your great Redeemer, we can do that. If you are a child of God and perhaps you've been caught in despair, perhaps you feel like for too long you haven't had hope, find hope in God today. If you need anything at all, come now while we stand, while we sing.